Diana Caldwell had always been the kind of woman who kept things together. The home, the marriage, the image. For 35 years, she'd stayed beside Mark, raised their daughter, tended to his needs, and buried every ache beneath polite smiles and small gestures. Now 60, with retirement bringing long hours of silence, she found herself in a house that echoed more with absence than presence. Mark still moved through life on scheduled coffee at 7 o'clock, paper at 7:15, news on. At 7:30, they shared a table, but not a connection. Words came and went like traffic noise. Necessary, brief, impersonal. She stopped trying to dress up for breakfast. He never noticed. Her hair had gone silver, but not by vanity's choice. She just gave up dyeing it. The woman he used to call beautiful hadn't disappeared. She simply faded quietly until even mirrors felt foreign. Mark didn't cheat, didn't hit, didn't scream. That was part of the problem. He was present, but never there. He gave her loyalty, but not love. Security, not intimacy. The kind of marriage people praised from the outside while it rotted softly underneath. Diana didn't even know what she needed anymore. Something to look forward to. A glance that held meaning. A voice that made her feel seen again. She started walking every evening 10 blocks down the same road, a quiet stretch flanked by hydrangeas and low fences. It wasn't about fitness. It was about escaping a house that no longer felt like a home. She told herself it was for her health. That was a lie. One Tuesday, she passed Graham Walters sitting on his porch. He nodded. She nodded back. She recognized. The man widowed 2 years ago, former English professor, always polite, always reserved. The next evening, he said hello first. She stopped. They spoke about the weather, briefly. The following day, he complimented her scarf. She lingered a minute longer. By the end of the week, they were talking about books, retirement, memory. He had a kind voice. He remembered things she said. He laughed at her dry humor. It had been so long since someone listened without waiting to speak. Mark didn't ask where she walked to. He didn't ask what time she'd be back. He didn't ask anything at all. She told herself she was just being friendly. That a little company on a lonely road was harmless. But deep down, Diana knew what was happening. And it wasn't innocent. It was emotional hunger. A craving she hadn't acknowledged in years was now starting to take shape. Slow and undeniable. She didn't tell Mark about Graham. Not because she was doing something wrong yet, but because she didn't want to hear herself justify it. The porch conversations became ritual. Some evenings, he brewed chamomile tea. She accepted. Some nights, she skipped dinner with Mark. To extend her walk just a bit longer, she never lied. But she withheld. And that silence between them grew heavier. She thought about Graham's hands, gentle, expressive, not reaching but comforting. She thought about the way he paused before answering, as if her words deserved space. She started dressing differently on her walks, a softer shade of lipstick. Perfume, though she told herself it was habit. She felt ridiculous and foolish and alive all at once. One night, Graham shared how he'd lost his wife to cancer and how the quiet in his house still startled him. Diana felt her throat tighten. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She told him how she missed being touched without it being obligatory. How she hadn't been kissed with intention in over a decade. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When she walked home that night, she didn't go in right away. She stood by the door, hand on the knob, heartbeat loud. Mark was watching. The news, same as always. She went upstairs without a word. In the mirror, she stared at her reflection. There was a glow she hadn't seen in years, but it wasn't joy, it was danger. The kind that came when emotions ran faster than judgment. Guilt. Followed her to bed. Not guilt for feeling something. Guilt for needing it so badly. Mark slept beside her, unaware. She lay wide awake, wondering what line she'd crossed already, not with her body, but with her mind. She knew the difference, and still, it terrified her, because the part that was missing wasn't sex. It was being wanted. Not needed. Not tolerated. Wanted. And now, someone did. The messages started the following week. Short, harmless at first. Graham sent her a poem he'd mentioned during one of their talks. She replied with a thank you and a smiley face. The next day, he asked how her walk went. She responded without thinking. The conversation moved easily. Books, music, small moments, neither of them had shared with anyone else in years. Diana felt her hands shake sometimes when she typed, not from fear, but anticipation. She deleted the messages afterward, not to hide, but to pretend she hadn't enjoyed them as much as she did. Mark didn't notice a shift. Or maybe he chose not to. He still ate in silence, left dishes for her to clear, asked routine questions out of habit. She watched him from across the table and realized how little curiosity he had left for who she'd become. Graham asked her things Mark hadn't asked in decades. What made her laugh? What scared her? What she dreamed of when she was alone? The emotional safety she felt with him was dangerous. She knew it. Still, she kept answering. One evening, Graham asked if she wanted to come by instead of walking. He said he had a record she might like. Diana stared at her phone for several minutes. Then she said yes. She told Mark she was going to a book club meeting, the first real lie she'd spoken aloud in years. He barely looked up. She left the house with her heart in her throat. At Graham's. The lights were low, music soft, the wine already open. They sat too close. She felt it immediately. Her body tensed, but not from fear. The conversation was warm, the space intimate, the air thick with the kind of silence that waits to be broken. He brushed her hand lightly while passing the glass. She didn't pull away. When it happened, there was no dramatic pause, no confession of love. Just a shift, a moment where restraint lost its grip. The kiss was hesitant, then deepened, years of repression erupting all at once. They didn't speak. It moved quickly, like falling into warm water. Familiar in some ways, foreign in others. There was no fantasy to it. Just skin against skin, breath against breath, need meeting need. Afterward, she sat on his bed, clutching her clothes, silent. He reached for her hand, but she moved away. Her eyes stung, not from tears but from what this meant. She whispered that she had to go. He didn't stop her. On the walk home, her body felt disconnected, as if the weight of what happened hadn't settled yet. The street felt different, her house even more so. She slipped inside like a ghost. Mark was asleep. She stood in the doorway watching him. Nothing about him had changed. The same way he curled his hand beneath the pillow. The same faint whistle when he exhaled. She hated how much she still remembered about loving him, and how none of it had been enough to stop her. For days, she avoided Graham's texts. He sent only one after the silence. "Are you okay?" She didn't reply. The guilt came in waves. Not from breaking vows, but from breaking something in herself she once thought unshakable. She walked, but never passed his house. When she saw his car in the driveway, her chest tightened. She felt both drawn and repelled. Mark started acting strangely, not angry, just watchful. He asked if she was feeling all right. Mentioned she seemed distracted. She said she was just tired. He nodded. End of conversation. That, in itself, stung more than anything. He didn't press. He didn't suspect. He didn't seem to want to know. It was worse than confrontation. It was indifference. One night, she found herself standing by their wedding photo. She studied the frame, the expressions, how young they were, how full of intention. She thought about who that woman was. Hopeful, certain, entirely devoted. She didn't recognize herself in that girl anymore. She wondered if Mark even recognized the man he used to be. The worst part wasn't the secret. It was the realization that she'd been gone long before anything happened. That she'd been starving emotionally and didn't even know how to ask for nourishment. That she'd been invisible even to herself. And when Graham finally saw her, it felt like sunlight, but also like fire. She tried to imagine confessing. But the thought terrified her. Not because of what Mark might say, but because of what he might not. Would he rage or just shrug? Would he mourn her betrayal or realize it didn't matter anymore? One evening, she sat alone on the porch. No Graham, no music. Just silence and the memory of something she couldn't undo. Her phone buzzed again, his name. She deleted it without opening. Not because she hated him. Because she hated who she had become when she was with him. Not weak, not evil, just unmet, unguarded, unready. And that, in itself, was betrayal. She went inside. Mark didn't look up. Dinner was in the microwave. She sat across from him and tried to speak, but nothing came. The silence between them wasn't new. It was just louder now. Graham moved out quietly. No farewell, no confrontation. Just an empty driveway and a darkened porch. Diana stood by the window one morning and realized she hadn't seen his car in days. Her heart didn't sink, it clenched. There would be no final conversation, no explanation, only the lingering ache of something unfinished. She told herself it was for the best. That endings without drama were cleaner. But truthfully, it hurt more to be erased than confronted. She returned to her old routine. But everything now carried the weight of what had happened. Folding laundry, washing dishes. The silence felt heavier, like the air had thickened. Her body still remembered his touch in flashes she wished she could control. Not from longing, but from shame. Mark continued moving through the days the same way. The only difference was Diana's internal collapse. She avoided mirrors, avoided her phone, avoided moments that felt too quiet. But guilt always found her in the gaps. One morning while cleaning the bedroom, she found the journal. Not just found it, ripped it open, almost on impulse, and began to write. Every thought, every emotion, every secret detail. Not for forgiveness, not for clarity, but for the need to see herself without hiding. She filled pages, the smell of Graham's shirt, the sound of Mark's silence, her own breathless lies. It wasn't a confession. It was a mirror. And it revealed a woman she hadn't met before. Not a villain. Not a victim. Just someone unraveling. She hid the journal under a pile of blankets in the linen closet. But Mark found it anyway. A day later, she came home to silence thicker than usual. He was in the living room, holding the journal. His hands didn't tremble. His face didn't break. He didn't yell. He just looked at her like he was seeing someone else for the first time. Then he said quietly, "I read it all." She waited for the punishment. Instead, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were this lonely?" The softness in his voice shattered her. She opened her mouth to explain but found nothing. Her throat closed. Tears came before words. Then she whispered, "Because I didn't think it would change anything." That was the truth. She hadn't cheated because of lust. She had fallen because silence had rotted the roots, and no one noticed until the branches cracked. Mark didn't speak for a long time. When he did, it wasn't forgiveness. It was honesty. "I haven't been here for years either," he admitted. "I just assumed we'd keep going until it ended naturally." She asked, "And what does that mean now?" He didn't answer. He stood up, walked to the hallway, and paused. "I don't hate you," he said, "but I don't know what to do with you either." That night, he slept in the guest room. The house felt unfamiliar again. Like it had when they first bought it. Bare walls, too many shadows. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she and Mark touched without obligation. Her body still carried the memory of betrayal, but it also carried the deeper wound. Years of being unloved out loud. Emily visited the next weekend. Diana told her the truth in fragments, expecting judgment. But her daughter surprised her. "I don't condone it," Emily said. "But I get it. I see you." That simple sentence was more than Diana had heard from anyone in years. She nodded, unable to hold her tears. It didn't make anything better, but it made her feel a little less alone. Mark kept his distance, but he didn't leave. Meals were separate, conversations sparse. They became housemates coexisting in the aftermath of something neither fully understood. The journal remained untouched on the bookshelf, like a permanent reminder of what words could do when spoken too late. Diana no longer walked past Graham's house. She didn't need to. What had happened wasn't about him anymore. It was about the version of herself that rose out of neglect, desperate to feel something, anything. She didn't mourn the man. She mourned the space he filled and what it revealed. One morning, she made coffee for two, placed both cups on the table, and waited. Mark entered the room, paused, then sat down. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything at all. But he drank the coffee. And for the first time in weeks, she took that as a beginning. Not of healing, not yet, but of acknowledgement. She didn't ask for more. She no longer believed in perfect endings, only in honest ones. The kind where silence is replaced by slow truths, where love is no longer assumed but earned, and where betrayal isn't the end, but the crack that lets the light in, if you're willing to look at what it shows. Diana no longer looked for answers. Whatever she'd been seeking that night with Graham had already revealed itself in the worst possible way. It wasn't about passion or even romance. It was a desperate reaction to being invisible for too long. But now everything had changed. Not just with Mark, not just within the house, but inside her. She wasn't trying to justify anything anymore. She was just trying to understand the cost. Mark didn't bring it up again. There were no long talks, no questions. He withdrew further, this time in a way that felt final. He stopped noticing the little things, or maybe he was just choosing not to. The distance between them became less about punishment and more about survival. They functioned. Bills were paid, groceries stocked, the garbage taken out. But the silence between them had weight now, not emptiness. It was filled with what they both knew but couldn't undo. She sometimes caught him looking at her, not with anger, but something close to unfamiliarity, as if trying to figure out who he'd been living beside for the past 3 decades. She didn't look away. There was no shame left in her eyes. Just exhaustion. The kind that sets in when pretending is no longer possible. She didn't ask for another chance. He didn't offer one. But they shared space. That, for now, was enough. She went back to writing, not in the journal, but on scraps of paper. Small thoughts, moments she didn't want to forget. Like how she no longer flinched when she passed by a mirror, or how she'd started listening to old records again alone, this time without feeling watched. She never wrote Graham's name again. He had been a symptom, not the cause. Her real betrayal had been against her own silence. Years of tolerating the slow erosion of connection, because it was easier than facing the truth. Emily began calling more often. Diana never told her the full details, but her daughter knew enough, and she didn't judge. She offered updates about her own life, spoke honestly, didn't tiptoe around the subject. It helped. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded Diana that honesty didn't have to come with punishment. It could just exist. Mark eventually moved his things back into their bedroom, but he didn't sleep beside her. He chose the recliner. Sometimes the couch. He said it was back pain. She didn't push. There were nights she missed the sound of his breathing next to her, even if it had meant nothing for years. Now it felt like absence with form. She stopped reaching for him. There had been enough reaching. The neighborhood changed. Graham's house was rented out to a young couple with loud music and bright porch lights. It made her walks easier. There were no memories attached to it anymore, just a physical space, stripped of meaning. She no longer paused on that side of the block. She didn't consider herself healed. Healing implied something was over. What she felt now was more like adjustment. A quiet acceptance that things wouldn't return to what they were, nor should they. The version of herself that allowed the marriage to fall into silence was gone. The version who needed to be chosen at all costs gone too. What remained was a woman who could finally sit alone and not feel punished by it. Mark began talking more, not about the past but practical things, taxes, home repairs, news stories. It wasn't connection, but it was movement. She responded. Politely, never cold, never warm, somewhere in the middle. Trust wasn't something either of them brought up. It was clear they both knew it was gone, and that if it returned, it would come in fragments. Not forgiveness. One afternoon, she found Mark outside, watering the plants. He looked up and said, "You always liked the roses. I thought I'd try keeping them alive this year." It wasn't a peace offering, but it was something. She didn't reply right away. Then she said, "Thank you," and went back inside. That moment lived in her longer than she expected. The years ahead didn't look like repair. They looked like coexistence. Maybe they'd rebuild something new. Maybe not. But Diana had stopped imagining dramatic resolutions. The truth had already done its damage. Now it was about what could still be salvaged. She wasn't hopeful, but she was awake. And that, after everything, felt like enough. She still carried the weight of her decision, not as a wound, but as a reminder. A choice made out of hunger, out of quiet desperation, out of forgetting her own worth. She never expected anyone to understand it, not even herself completely. But she no longer ran from it. The pain didn't define her. The silence no longer controlled her. And the truth, however ugly, had set everything in motion. Not to destroy, but to begin again. Without lies, without pretending, with nothing left to hide.